I'd like to go over geographical information systems to basically give a bit of background to these very powerful tools that we now take pretty much for granted. And what I'm going to do is begin by looking at how a geographical information system works. GIS systems, which is what we're going to refer to them by, are simply a form of electronic map. Being an electronic map, they're a collection of data. Unlike other information systems, geographical information systems are based on some sort of spatial data set. So this means that there is a map drawn in a computer file that really looks like a set of coordinates connected together in some logical way, usually by a set of vectors. A vector is simply a straight line connecting 2 points with length and direction. And by assembling sets of vectors, making that set of points, the vectors between them and so on, into a closed figure, some sort of a polygon, and then perhaps defining the space inside as an area of interest. It could be the cadastral, the legal boundaries of a farm. It could be the boundaries of a forest. It could be the sides of a river. It could be where a cliff is. It could be contour lines, transmission lines, fence lines, roads, almost anything that you would expect to find or you could find on a map. Easy. So it's simply a set of coordinates and relationships. And that's the sort of thing that computers do very, very well. Once a computerized map of this sort is built, it exists as a large data file. And the nice thing about it is that it's more or less permanent. And this has seen the large growth in the development of these, and to a certain extent the proliferation of them, over the last 40 years or so. Basically the other side of about 1980, you didn't see very much in the area of geographical information systems, simply because putting all of those points and the geometry, the logical relations between them into a computer was very difficult. Computers were fairly primitive, they didn't have the amount of storage required and so on. However, now it's been done. Because a lot of this data is relatively stable, the contour lines in New South Wales or Australia or Queensland haven't changed a great deal in recent times, and they're not going to change a great deal. Maybe if they do, it might be a local situation where someone's built a mine somewhere or a quarry or whatever, and so the contour is going to change a little bit. But typically, they're fairly stable. What this means is that once a data system, a geographically defined data system, is put together, it's then available pretty much permanently. And so there are sets of data that go back to the 1980s that, say the cadastral system, for instance, it's all been digitised. It was digitised through the 1980s, 40 years ago. That's largely there and it's available. So whether Google want to use it, or the state government, or some state government department, or a private data provider who is going to be hooking it into some bit of data like people's trends in watching television. This area watches this channel or uses that YouTube, whatever, more often than that. Whatever you can assemble as a set of data connected to geographical limits can go into these systems. Now, the next thing about geographical information systems is that they are then linked. Usually when you open something, let's say Google Earth, which is something familiar to most people, what you're seeing is a series of data files all layered together. And so we might have one set of data which is where the roads are, another set of data where the cadastral, like the legal boundaries are, another set of data which could be the transmission lines, the water pipes, you name it. Even things like dog licenses can be linked to particular properties and therefore put on your GIS. And what you then see on your computer screen, or maybe print out if you want to put it on a paper or something, is then that set of data that you're interested in. We refer to those as layers, and you'll see a diagram of that in the study guide. If you think of a layer as something like a map drawn on maybe a transparent film of plastic, and each layer is one map drawn on transparent film, and then they're simply stacked on top of each other. That's what you see when you open up Google Earth or some proprietary map or something, or maybe the Queensland globe or the New South Wales globe, one of those. And so the idea of layering is important. The idea of these sets of digital data based on coordinates and sets of coordinates hooked together to give polygons, shapes. That's basically the theory behind GIS systems. The other aspect of GIS which has become very common or very important is its linkage to the global positioning system. Now, we talk about GPS all the time. All of us, I would imagine, have used some GPS mapping system, maybe to drive your car, maybe it's on your iPhone or your Android or what have you. They are simply everywhere now. The GPS system, Global Positioning System, actually started from the American military's need for accurate positioning. So they set up a handful of satellites, and it was only a handful in the early days, and things like nuclear submarines and tanks rolling across the desert somewhere were able to get communication with the satellites, and from the interaction between the satellites and ground observatories and the nuclear submarine, for instance, the nuclear submarine was able to find where it was positioned on the Earth. So GPS was originally done for military purposes. However, as time went on, GPS became available for civilian use, at first with lower accuracy, but now GPS is able to locate you, even just as simple as on your mobile phone, as you well know, to within a few meters anywhere on the planet, which is pretty powerful. When you connect GPS coordination, in other words, saying where you are on the planet as a result of your device's communication with these satellites floating around up in the sky, then with a geographical information system, in other words, an electronic map, then you've got something like Google Maps or iMaps or Google Earth and so on. And that's our geographical information systems. The advantage of this is that a lot of data for property economics and property management purposes is spatial, pretty obviously. If you want to know the urban zonings, you go to a map. Best maps or the most convenient maps are electronic maps, and so you simply open that up. Similarly with rural uses, where you're probably more likely to be interested in things like native vegetation, soil types, microclimate, topography, contour lines, where the cliffs and rivers and creeks are, and that sort of thing. Again, fairly obvious. And that's pretty much what we cover, I think, in this topic. The applications of GIS are really, really important. Now, you guys already know that, so I guess I'm not really sort of saying anything to you, except it's good to be aware of where it's coming from and how it all works. There are a couple of limitations. One is the limitation with data accuracy. I mentioned earlier that the data, once it was built, once these data sets are built, whether it's the cadastral boundaries for Australia or where the rivers are or what have you, tends to be fairly stable. And so it's a matter of making sure that when a subdivision is done or some realignment of a road is done, that information then is updated into the data set, which is then available to define the cadastral boundaries or the rivers or the roads or whatever it is, water pipe locations, stuff like that. Data management is important, and what this means is that there's been a fair bit of thought, pretty much behind the scenes for your purposes, but a fair bit of thought to data management and the auditing, the correction, the making sure that the data sets only really live in one place and they're then available to whoever wants to use them. Usually they buy or lease them. and the originating organisation has to maintain them. It's good to be aware of that, because there are occasions where the data is out of date. Most people either have had the experience of, or heard of other people who have had the experience of using their Google Maps or their TomTom GPS navigator in their car or something to take them from point A to B, and only to find that they drive along a road and end up in front of a locked gate or something, because Google Maps thinks there is a road going through there, whereas the reality is a locked gate. And there's no point in trying to argue that the locked gate shouldn't be there because your phone says it's not. That's an example of the importance of keeping the data accurate. The other issue is the access to it and the coordination, and that has to do usually with GPS positioning and so on. If you find yourself going into a tunnel or in some other situation, into a building, for instance, where your phone or your other device cannot see, cannot communicate with the GPS satellites, because your device is relying on those satellites flying ahead to have like radio communication with. If you're in a situation where you can't have radio communication, then obviously GPS breaks down, and that means that you can't do very much with GPS positioning and GIS applications once you end up in that situation. So, for instance, a common thing in the bush is under trees, or especially in forests, you've got to have a fair bit of tree cover to block out the GPS satellites. Some of you have probably experienced this if you're driving along using some of the GPS-based applications on your phones or whatnot, and a little voice comes up and says, lost GPS contact or something like that, and it basically says you're flying blind. That is a practical problem, and it means that you have to design your work so that you're not going to fall foul of these communication issues. And so if you are going out into the bush somewhere or onto a remote rural property, one important thing to do is to make sure that you download the maps. That's a data download. You do that while you're in town or in the office where you've got good access to the internet, and you can download that data set into your device. And that way, when you go out into the mulga, you're not relying on, your internet provider sending you down those little packets of data to work out whether there's a creek in front of you or a cliff or whatever it is. That's pretty important. So there are those two connection issues: the access to the GPS satellites, and also making sure you've got the data. That's pretty much it. I'm not going to attempt to walk you through commercial products and so on, or even the government ones. You've come across those before, and you'll come across others in your professional practice. One of the things that is happening is that the use and availability of data in a GIS format is expanding, pretty much, I won't say daily, but certainly almost monthly, where there are new products coming onto the market and new data sets being available. And so things like the government data for things like vegetation and landform and so on for the rural users, things like the Queensland Globe and so on. They're relatively recent developments, extraordinarily convenient, and they're not the end of the line. They are going to continue to expand, or what's available is going to continue to expand as you go along. I guess the last thing about GIS systems is that it's linked with the whole area of electronic spatial data, and the connection of electronic spatial data together is an exciting area, and it's one which is still evolving. We've been talking about GIS systems, which tend to be historical. You plug into a GIS system and it might tell you where all of the water licenses are, for instance. Okay. That's great. Another GIS system might tell you exactly where you are, so how far you are from a bore. That's fine. As you drive around a property, you can track where you've been and have that basically mapped onto your GIS system. There are many things like that. We're probably not very far off being able to add to geographical information systems kind of on the run by taking photos and having them kind of basically stuck or made into a collage on your maps. And that's pretty much what Google Maps does in its Street View, you know, the little man. And some of you have probably seen the Google vehicles driving around with their camera systems sitting on the roof racks and so on. And what they are doing is driving down, you know, almost every road in Australia, or in fact in the world. And as they're driving along, they are linked by GPS, and the data that they are recording is then being logged into the evolving data set, which is the Street View for Google, which is an extraordinary global data set. Why can't you do that when you do an inspection on a rural property? No reason at all. And even things like driving around a building or some other piece of rural infrastructure, taking photos of it and having your computer basically rebuild it in 3 dimensions in a file back in your office, if that's going to be useful to you. So all of these things are, in a sense, available and being used at present. Certainly the Street View in Google is a good example of that. And the movement of these systems, at first from the experimental level, maybe for military purposes, then down to a commercial level, and then finally to a free for the user sort of app on your phone or whatnot. You can see that kind of evolution in the GPS system in general, and a number of the apps that are now using this combination of GPS and GIS. So keep your antenna up. This stuff is constantly evolving. It's good to have a bit of a background to it, which is really the purpose of this module. But as far as where it's going, we can only guess. And for that matter, what is current on the day and date when you watch this video, who knows? That'll be tomorrow probably, and so I can't tell you what it is because I'm only living here in today. That pretty much finishes up our unit. I hope you've enjoyed rural valuation, and after the mild inconvenience of the exam, it looks like it's plain sailing. Good luck.